Welcome back to the Comics Aficionados, everybody. We got a little bit of a smaller panel here. Now we're cooking. We got Doc in here as well. But it looks like we got somewhat of a full panel. We might also have Brian Ball or Aaron Sparrow here. They haven't showed up yet. But today we're going to talk about kind of we're going to go inside the culture crisis that is the comic book industry. Obviously, there's been a lot of information that came out, over the last week or two about all the insanity, about some of the allegations within the industry. But there's a lot more problems, really, and we're going to talk about more than just what's going on right now, and try to get to the heart of what the issues are, and really just kind of bring some things out in the open. And here to talk with me about this is my good friend Doc. Late notice. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, not a problem, dude. Not a problem. Thanks for having me on. Morning, Perch. Morning, Yule.
Good morning, Doc.
Good morning.
And also with us is Yule Carter for Fantastic Comics. How you doing?
I'm wonderful. Looking forward to it.
Nice. Hopefully you got your shipment in already. Apparently not. And obviously we do have the man himself, Perch from Perch Comics by Perch. How you doing, buddy?
I'm doing okay. It's been a rough, crazy week.
It has been a rough, crazy week. So we're not just going to jump into all the allegations that are out there right now. I just want to give a good example of kind of the industry that we're dealing with. And, this is something that was brought to my attention by Perch. I think the Comic Book Hut might have actually covered this as well. But it's just revolting when you hear this story. So let's get it out in the open, Perch. Let's talk about this comic strip and really why it is emblematic of what is wrong with the comic book industry as far as culture.
It's funny. I'd seen this and I'd heard some rumors and some rumblings about this and forgot about it. And then it was brought to my attention again a couple weeks ago. And it is one of those things where you look at it and, how could it possibly be bad? What's wrong with this? It's a kid kind of comics. Eric Larson's doing similar things in the back of his books, this kind of style. What could possibly be weird about this? And it's not until you really dig into the details of it that you get to kind of the sinister background of what's going on here. And basically, this is Ty Templemoff, which it's Ty Templeton. No, I'm not sure exactly why he used a different name, other than perhaps the joke. It looks pretty innocent. It's a do-it-yourself kind of save time tip about how to hit in a nail straight into a board without it going wrong. No problems. And it says, thanks to Lee Travis of Cleveland, Ohio. And that's probably your first clue that something's amiss, because Lee Travis was the name of the Crimson Avenger. And it's a comic book in the 30s, but there was a 4-issue limited series in the 80s when this was printed. All good. So why does that matter? Well, the guy doing Crimson Avenger was a guy named Greg Brooks. And Greg Brooks was an artist doing a lot of work for DC at the time. And he had a problem right before this comic strip came out, where he had actually killed his wife with a hammer. He beat her to death. And so in context, this strip starts to look a little bit more disgusting in terms of they're making these jokes about how to hit in a hammer the right way and do all the rest. And there's other little details and all the rest. The editor for this was Mark Waid. And Waid is, copped to this being a reason why he was blacklisted or kind of kicked out of DC for a while, or at least it was not on the graces. And because he let this thing go through, but he acknowledged kind of its connection. And then furthermore, I mean, just getting to the weird part, and this definitely is in the gossip territory. The final little line in this comic strip was, "Gee, thanks for the tip." Okay, again, what could that mean? Except there were jokes at the time, and there's some rumors, at least, that the editor was actually having an affair with Brooks' wife at the time, which may have led to the whole incident. And again, there's a lot of gossip in there, but we know at least some parts of this are true. The Lee Travis, I mean, it's too much of a coincidence for it all. But unfortunately, this isn't the only example. There's lots of little subversive things in comics that, it can be kind of fun, but are also making fun of murder and sleeping around with people's wives. And I mean, just there's some parts that's really, really gross when you dig into it.
Yeah, and Mark Waid isn't exactly an unknown entity. And in fact, this was essentially what got him kind of booted out of DC Comics, and he hasn't been invited back since, correct?
No, I think there's been other little moments. I don't think it was a full stops or other things that went on there. And to be clear, this isn't like, hey, let's get somebody in trouble today. This already came out. There have been interviews. They've been acknowledged. People have talked about this being the most disgusting joke DC ever printed. I mean, this isn't a new story. This isn't something new to cancel anybody over. It was something that kind of, in the moment it went out. It shouldn't have gone out. You should have been making fun of somebody getting murdered. And it kind of was dealt with at the time. But to your point, this is kind of, you think about the psychology of the things that go on in comics. At some point, some people thought this was okay enough to create, to make this joke, to put out, to print. As an editor, your job is to really censor and not put this kind of stuff out. Why? That kind of becomes the question of why does the comic industry tolerate this kind of stuff? And it has for a long time.
Yeah, that's not obviously the only thing, but when you take that in the context of, I believe there's a man, he kind of lost his publishing company, and Mark Waid sent him black roses that essentially the note said, "What would your recently passed away wife think of you? Now that you failed with your company and stuff like this." What's that? Yeah, cross-gen.
Yeah.
And Mark Waid is still a powerful man in the industry. He's an executive at a comic book publisher right now, and people know this about him. And that is a lot of what's wrong with the comic book industry. They know that he passed through this joke about a man who murdered his wife, who he allegedly was cheating with. We know that he sent black roses to the owner of CrossGen when his comic book publishing company failed, with a letter that said, "What would your dead wife think about you now?" We know that he's had all these incidences, yet he's an executive in this industry. If that doesn't spell it out for you, what's wrong with comic books, what's wrong with comic book culture, I don't know how much better I could say it.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think it's, there's something about the industry where they tolerate things that are really, you wouldn't tolerate in other businesses. You wouldn't in big companies. And it's not like somebody mentioned in the chat, should we get an authority on proper online etiquette? I mean, it's less, you could put guidelines out there, but a lot of this is common sense. I mean, I think everybody probably listening to this, all of us here on the panel know that, we wouldn't, if somebody murdered his wife, we wouldn't print a comic book joke about it and under a DC label and put it out there. We wouldn't send, flowers kind of mocking somebody's dead wife. It's just basic kind of human decency. But the comic industry just tolerates this stuff. And then when it gets pushed too far in certain areas, then everybody gets surprised. Like, oh, I can't believe this guy is so creepy and terrible. It's like, you can't, the signs were clearly there for a long time.
Yeah, this would be like if instead of when Wizard bought Pittsburgh Comic Con, if somebody else bought it and decided to rename it Murder Con because the guy that owned it before got arrested for murdering his wife.
Sure.
You just don't do that. This is common sense stuff.
Yeah, it really is. It's really it's just thinking about the way that he's risen up in the industry, just with nepotism, gatekeeping, good old boy network stuff. We also know that Mark Waid was able to bring in, I believe his girlfriend at the time was able to just hire on to be the writer of Nightwing. I believe
Devin Grayson.
Yeah, Devin Grayson at the time. So it just, to me, that just speaks about the industry and lays a good foundation of what's wrong with it. Yul Carter, you haven't really spoke up yet. What are your thoughts on some of this information?
Well, that story I had never heard before. I heard it before today, but not long ago actually. So I never knew. But yeah, you hear about Mark Waid. If we're just talking about him specifically, like that surprised me. But then you hear all the other stories, about his. If people saw me at my worst moments, but I haven't put it in comic book print, my worst moments. But if they saw me at my worst moments, they might get a different, opinion of me. So, the one thing I'll say is like, you got to take everything, in the moment and understand what's going on. But Mark Waid's had a bunch of those. I've had a bunch of those, but I'm not as important as Mark Waid also. Now the comic book industry is crazy, and it's who you know. I guess it's who you sleep with sometimes. And, all these people know each other. It's just so very incestuous, whether it's a group from the 70s, 80s, 90s, it doesn't matter. These people all know each other and have these in jokes or secrets that they don't want other people to know. And the longer someone sticks around in the business, like a Mark Waid, the more information there's going to be about them, and probably heinous stuff that they've done also.
And
That's
I know
comics.
you were actually trying to become a writer in the comic book industry. You were trying to get your foot in the door for a while. What
Back
was
in
it
the
like
day.
as an aspiring writer to try and get in there? Was it
I did all the cons. I schmoozed, but it wasn't. I wasn't in the right circles, and I didn't know how to. Back when I was trying to break in, it was you send in your copy, your synopsis and your 3-page out, 3 pages of script, and then hopefully they pay attention to you. They never do. You got to get hooked up with an artist, really. So after a while, breaking in with a small company and then doing stuff, I just decided this is not for me. I don't like playing games like that, and it's just not for me.
Well, if you don't know somebody that's going to just give you a job already, like because it's your buddy, then the best way is to go and just do your own thing, publish yourself, and then eventually you'll get picked up.
Yeah.
How many times did Todd McFarlane have to send in his submissions? Was it like over 500 times? He's one of the greatest artists of all time. Before they finally noticed him.
I doubt Todd McFarlane now would have to send in 500 submissions, though, even if he didn't do it on his own. And because just have to do it cheap.
Right. No, it's but there was a comment in the chat that I think was really a good question. Yeah, it's are there industries where it's not about who you know? And it's true. I mean, this is one of those things where I think it's why this gets away with it in comics for so long. Nepotism or networking or all that stuff exists in every industry. It absolutely does. The difference is with comics that I'm sure it is in a few other industries, but what is more prevalent in comics is that there's not the necessary checks and balances typically for that network. There's networking you get into tech or pharma or any of these other fields, but there typically is an HR department. There typically are checks and balances to make sure somebody's not gaming the system and they're not bringing kind of unqualified people for taking the money, all the rest. It doesn't mean people don't try, and it doesn't mean people don't get away with it, but it's far less prevalent for it to completely run amok because there are these other functions in place. And in comics, because of the whole independent contractor, there's this very loose relationship between who's actually employed and who's just kind of on contract, and how people are kind of told to police themselves. Even this recent problem with the harassment and everything else, you're seeing a lot of creators kind of policing themselves. And in one hand, that's nice that they're doing that. It's good for everybody to encourage everybody to have personal responsibility. But on the other hand, there's a responsibility for the publisher not to let this stuff just run crazy. As much as it was, I think, disgusting and distasteful for Waid to do this kind of stuff, which it was, you do have to ask. I mean, he was an editor at DC at the time, but why was there not a better structure at DC to make sure that a small group of people couldn't put out something that was, mocking the murder and conviction of one of their artists, that shouldn't be allowed to just float out into the air. And that's where comics does not have that structure.
Well, comics is generally, it's such a small industry, it's such a niche industry that it's the same reason for a lot of the things. Like you can interfere with people's publishing contracts because it's too damn small to get regulatory oversight. And it's the way that they've always done business. So you either rock the boat and change the way the business is done, in which case guarantees that you don't end up getting hired. Other people might, but you won't. The people behind you might, but you won't. Or you play the game because it's too small to get regulated.
Yeah, and that is part of the problem for sure.
And then if you're trying to break in, you don't know what that game is necessarily or who to play it with. And, you know, and you're just kind of like, that. I always say that it's like, it feels so very carny, comic books do. And, you know, and when I kind of mean that is like, if there's a problem, they don't want to talk about it, you know, and now it's being talked about, all the problems that are going on in comics. But as Perch has said before, and I think I've said it before, the industry just isn't run like a real company. You know, you kind of think that DC Comics is because Warner Brothers has been, you know, associated with them for so long. And they actually have a publishing, you know, house, and how they release things is very much like a real publisher, not just a comic book company. And so you think that there's some structure within, you know, all the people that work at DC, and then you see something like that cartoon, or you see all the accusations that are coming out now, and you realize that even the best model of a company within comics is like not regulated at all within, and it's just ridiculous. That Berganza stuff, where, you know, he's like, you know, hitting on or molesting his female coworkers, and what do? They said, well, we'll just move everybody else into the other side of the office and just keep him in a corner. Everybody stay away from him, especially if you're a lady. And it's like, well, I guess that's a way to answer it. At least the Superman books are coming out on time, you know, and that's how they do it.
I do want to say thank you to Federico de la Casa for the €10 super chat. Yesterday, I was almost banned from a Facebook, I'm assuming this group, because I suggested on a site that reposted Gail Simone's rant about authors that they used the judicial system and was laughed off because I didn't believe all women. So this one's interesting. You know, a lot of these allegations are coming out, and, you know, a lot of them are pretty serious. But obviously, some people don't feel comfortable going to the police or using the judicial system. You know, what would you say about that one, Perch? Is that the end all be all? If you don't go to the police, you shouldn't even discuss it.
No. I think it has to come out. I mean, I think that's why Eddie's situation came out ultimately. Is they did try. I mean, they went through these different avenues. I'm not saying, you know, people should shut up and they shouldn't. They need to get it out somewhere. I do think it's wisest that you know, they try the judicial system first. I think that's the appropriate place for a lot of these things, especially if it's assault or some of these problems. It's the right thing to do. Some of what we're hearing on Twitter is what I would, you know, classic kind of HR violations. You wouldn't go to the police about it. But the broken part of the mechanism is not that people are coming out or not coming out. It's the fact that, you know, like you'll said, like some people in the chat are saying, there should be a mechanism in these companies to address this, and make no mistake about it. This happens all over the place. You know, somebody mentioned Walmart. There's lots of companies where these things go right. You know, sexual harassment we've seen in all industries, absolutely. The difference, though, in comics is that it's even the pretend trappings of a mechanism to address this do not exist, and they come up with very, very weird conclusions, like they did with Eddie of, well, let's just move all the women to the other side of the office. I mean, that was a serious solution somebody put together. That right there is crazy. And that's less of what you'd see in other places, that they would just kind of move things around. And I think, you know, again, yes, you can find other examples in other industries. You absolutely can. But comics, we're going to continue to have these problems and continue to see this stuff come out unless it's addressed more at the core.
Well, I do want to say thank you very much to Federico de la Casa for the super chat. It was very generous of you. I'm sorry, Yul, did I interrupted you?
No, it's all right. The thing all right, so you have your employees that work for you, and then you have contract workers. Can you actually expect a contract worker to hold your company's policies and, you know, adhere to them if they're not actually employees of your company? You know, you're just writing a script, right? Or drawing a comic, right? That's kind of my question. Is that a question?
The only choice is you just don't hire them again.
Right.
That's the way you have to handle this.
Well, and we see that too, though. I mean, what happened to that person that I used to know in comics, and where are they? And if they're not, if they're not like Chris Claremont and they're being paid to not do anything, then they just disappeared. And why did they disappear? You know, maybe you don't know. Maybe there was something that happened. And since they're contract workers, you just don't have to hire them on anymore. And I mean, there's a lot of, like that guy from the Crimson Avenger, I would have never known about. Was that a good book, by the way?
I have no idea.
I mean, it was very much a sign of the times.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It just, I don't know. You can't really. If I'm a guy, I mean, I don't know. I don't know what a company, even if they have like solid structure when it comes to how they're going to, reprimand people or what rules you have to adhere to. If you're not an employee of that company, you're just, I can move and do anything I want whenever I want, and
There's a simple solution to this. You keep you still, whether they're employees or freelancers, your editor holds a personnel file on them, and then it just goes to corporate. So next time any editor wants to hire them, they just pull that personnel file. If there's a bunch of complaints in there, you're not allowed to hire them, period.
Right.
There's a simple way to solve this, but that would require them actually doing their fucking jobs.
And caring about what's being brought up also, probably.
Yes.
And is that really a reason to give them a check mark?
Exactly. No, that's why this is so screwed up. I think, as people bring up what we're saying here, yes, this definitely occurs in other industries. Obviously, you're seeing the news, you're hearing this stuff. Come on. But there is one, the nature of there being staff jobs and independent contractor jobs. It has a big impact, because what happens is, because they're not truly employees, they're independent contractors, like you're mentioning, Yoel, it gives them this back door to kind of ignore these problems. And in many cases, wash their hands of it. And it's a relationship that works really good for the publisher. And that's why it bugs me so much, is it allows them to basically say, well, we get all the benefit of this work going on, but if they ever do anything bad that makes us look bad, then we wash our hands of it. We don't know anything about it. And that lack of taking responsibility, particularly from companies, one of which likes to, cite the slogan, with great power comes great responsibility. This kind of is your responsibility as an employer. If you go to other industries and there's a big trade show, I mean, I've worked for other big companies in my life, and I remember going down to CES, which is a massive trade show in Vegas. I remember prior to going down, they let all of us know, hey, by the way, there's prostitution there, there's drugs, there's all this kind of stuff. You're there to work, you're on the clock. So make sure you don't, if you want to go and get nuts and have fun, you're doing that on your own time at a different trip. Don't embarrass the company, you're there for us. And comics absolutely doesn't do any of that. And so, it encourages this insanity from coming on. It's not like a legitimate company, for sure.
And these companies don't have any sort of hiring practices. There's no standard rules for it. They just hire whoever answers the damn phone.
So I do want to say thank you very much to Kenneth Dowling for the $10 super chat. Thank you for being generous and supporting the channel. What Yoel said, the comics industry not being run like a legitimate company, I agree with. This is similar to Hollywood, the way Hollywood runs, and that's how predatory behavior was allowed to go unchecked for years. And I think that's a good point. I do think a lot of the way that the comic book industry manages itself, not really having a lot of employees as far as the creators go, being able to pull hands off, like, listen, we pulled him off the project. It's not our problem anymore. Kind of exacerbates the issue. But then, as long as they have a friend in another company, there's always a soft landing spot. At least that's what it feels like.
And honestly, but that's the way it is in any industry. Up until LinkedIn became a thing a couple of years ago, if you had a bad run-in with another company, you just left it off your work history.
Yeah, to some extent, it's true. I mean, and there, and by the way, people should. I also think there's something to be said for giving somebody a second chance. I think mistakes happen. Absolutely, that's all true. It's in many cases, to me, it's less about the individual and it's more about what the company itself is doing to protect the other employees and themselves. And that's why I think I do. That's why comics feels at times like 1980s wrestling or some of these industries that were just kind of very much run on whatever people felt like doing at the time. And it's weird to see. I'm always surprised that comics watched what went on in Hollywood, and just nobody saw that as a wake-up call. Like, hey, rather than us being next, maybe we should start to make some adjustments here. That's a surprise to me.
Well, every industry is full of itself and thinks, well, it won't happen here.
That's true.
They think they're better than whoever else, whatever other industry had their problems, whatever ones was a bunch of screw-ups. Well, we're not screw-ups. Mm-hmm. That's the way that they always look at themselves. I mean, when has anyone in the entertainment industry ever really been able to accurately reflect upon themselves? And you know what? Just in general, in the world, I mean, most people delude themselves into thinking I and my friends are better than everyone else.
So I do want to say thank you very much to Kenneth Allen for the $10 super chat and supporting the channel. I think we might have another one here. We do. Also from Federico De La Casa. Thank you so much for the 10 euro super chat. First, you have to try the system. Then you can say the system is rotten and work against it. It seems like we're all in an Orwellian nightmare. I lost what you said of Waid passed. Could you repeat it? P.S. I loved Empire. Well, we'll agree to disagree on the Empire issue. But no, we were just talking about how Waid had used a very crass comic about a comic artist who had murdered his wife, was able to get it through and put it into a DC Comics issue, and how he was somewhat related to that. And then he had some other issues, yet still continues to be employed, and is not only employed, but he's actually an executive in the industry because they don't take things like that seriously, or seemingly don't. Yeah. What do you have to say about that, Perch?
No, I mean, I'd recommend we go through it in some good depth of the story before at the beginning. I would recommend you check that out. You'll get a better sense of it. You don't have to watch the whole show just at the very beginning. We go through it, and I would invite everybody. By the way, obviously there's some allegations in there, but that story, if you just Google it, you'll get to some interviews, because you may say that sounds ridiculous. I can't believe that could possibly be true. But go look at it, and not only will you find a lot of comments on it, but you'll find, Waid himself cops to it in many cases. That's the baffling part. It's not like it's this is some kind of weird conspiracy theory. It's like, no, people actually admitted to it, which is the bizarre part. And I don't know, you just got to look at this. I think we, as a lot of people who are critics, obviously Waid has a lot of history in the last several years amongst a lot of things on comics. A lot of people see him through that lens. I would urge everybody, it's not about Waid. This isn't a show about Waid. It's a behavior, and it's a lot of people, do this. And I mentioned it the other day. It was weird to me that there was so much outrage, so much anger about toxic fans, that the toxic fans are the problem. I mean, sure, if you want to complain about some people who are trolling, and definitely I've seen some of the live streams and some of the stuff that goes on is ridiculous. It's very immature. Absolutely. But clean your own house, before you go off and you point fingers everywhere else, you got to have your own house clean. And that's the problem.
Well, Perch, narcissists tend to react that way whenever their flaws are pointed out to them.
That's true.
And you have an industry of narcissists.
That's true.
So I do want to say thank you very much to Federico De La Casa for supporting the channel. It's very generous of you. If you're watching this video and you're enjoying the stream, please obliterate the like button. Just let everyone know that this is the place to be. And if this is your first time, consider subscribing to the channel. We have a lot of content. You will see all three of these fine gentlemen on the channel at times contributing, and obviously here on Comics Aficionados every Saturday. And like I said, thank you very much to Federico. We do have a comment from Larry's Comics, another contributor on the channel, and what he has to say kind of echoes what you guys were getting into. Comics has ignored its predatory personal issues while pointing the finger at fans and retailers for trumped up charges that would complement their publishing. I'm not sure what the last part is, but it is weird that they're always pointing out their fans as being what's wrong with the industry. But once you pull back the curtain and you see the stuff that goes behind the scenes, and we're going to definitely talk about the convention circuit here pretty soon, it's actually quite despicable.
It is. as I said, I kind of look at the industry as it's like an organism. It's made up of a bunch of individual people, but the overall, kind of the way that you can have like a national or a cultural identity. I think comics has, that can be looked at almost as its own person, like as an individual, like like an overall cultural identity. You can kind of see almost like a person that gets formed out of this mass of multiple people, and the industry has done that. And the person that it forms is a narcissistic sociopath that really, really, really thinks it's wildly over important and loses its goddamn mind the second it gets criticized, and then just tries to shift every amount of blame right back to the person accusing.
Yeah, well, that's how it usually works, right?
Yeah,
and I mean, you're right. People they have a lofty estimation of who they are in the comic world because it's so small and insular, obviously.
An unearned sense of self-importance.
Exactly. And the fans, it's one thing if someone's, crapping all over your hard work, I could understand being a little defensive about that. But the way they attack the fans or the publishers that we've, the comic store owners and stuff, the way they have is, it's telling because, when you see all this other stuff come out, and then they were talking such smack on, fans or retailers or whoever else outside of them. It just shows that maybe they were just being a little extra defensive because they had something else that they knew about, whether it's people they know or things that they've heard. Or when you're in an industry also that isn't paying you a whole lot, or you're not getting a whole lot of that, that gratification that you expected to have. And then a fan comes attacking you. I could understand, again, giving a little bit back. But, man, some of the things that these guys say about the fans are... What did Jim Shooter at 13 when he wants to write Legion of Superheroes? What would he have felt if he had the fan backlash that, some people get? Would he still keep writing?
I don't think he would have cared.
I think you brought, though, the comment about, I think Doc brought up about the business, it is too small of an industry. That's part of the problem. It's one of those weird things about comics is as it doesn't, as long as people aren't playing for bigger stakes, it does make people more comfortable to mess up and not solve these problems. I do believe, and I may be wildly wrong about this, but if this was a multi-billion-dollar industry, comics, not the movies attached to it, but just comics. And if creators, you get to a Marvel title where you're being published all over the world, and you had a yearly salary equivalent to $350, $450 K. If you're an editor for the X-Men line making $250 base plus stock, I think the behavior would be better because you'd have more to lose.
You have a lot to lose.
That's right. If you have more to lose, and what's weird to me about the comic industry, I've mentioned this to people before. There's comments I make over and over at retailer summits and everything that I think is always going to dox me because that's one I've made before many times. But I always get laughed at of saying, "Oh, that's ridiculous that comics will ever make that much money for funny books, for things printed on paper. No, there's never going to be that kind of business. That's ridiculous to even believe that." And what a sad way to look at the world. And I think what's funny is there's creators like Mark Millar, I think, who wants to make money. He likes making cash. And so he fought and he pushed and he got his Netflix deal and he's made millionaires out of a lot of the creators who have done work with him. And yet, why don't more people have that desire? If you're driving more toward cash, I do think it would solve some of these problems, honestly. But
I do want to address that. So I think we do have some generational culture clashes that have happened as far as people trying to make money. So I think the generation before us, I think a lot of that generation either witnessed or their parents were in the Great Depression, so they knew just what it could look like if nobody made money, and a lot of people were broke, and I think they were very interested in making money. Now, I think our generation, I think we're all in our early 40s here. except maybe Yule. He looked like he might be 30. All right, there you go. He's in his 40s.
I'm old.
We were all kind of left at home to as Gen Xers, and we were always told you can do anything if you put your mind to it, right? That's what we were always told. So very creative. So you have your guys like your Alan Moore's, even he's obviously a lot older than us, but your Denny O'Neill's, where they were taking the great storytelling techniques that Stan Lee and some of the originals created, and they started throwing in a little bit more social issues. Chris Claremont obviously did that in X-Men, throwing a little social commentary like this. Well, the generation after us, they weren't told you can do anything if you put your mind to it. They were told essentially you are going to change the world. You are going to change the world. They've been told that over and over and over. And I've talked to people, when I was in the military and I had younger people working for me, and they don't get a sense of accomplishment if they don't feel like they're changing the world, which there apparently is just broken at a fundamental level. A lot of younger people feel that. So I think what we're seeing, the generation after us, they're taking what our generation kind of did, where you started throwing in some social commentary with great storytelling techniques, and they're foreboding the storytelling and focusing on the social commentary because they want to change the world using comic books, and they don't care about money.
Well, that plus the fact that they're a bunch of commies.
Well, I think it's the politics aside, because I think it can shift in different ways. I think you're right. I think it's I talk to people from time to time at conventions or other shows, and it's weird how you hear the comment, "Well, I'm not in it for the money," over and over and over again, and it's like, okay,
why not?
And I get having a passion. When
some people are in it for the platform.
Yeah, and so that's right, and I think that's a big difference, because people will say I'm in it for the passion, but I don't think they're in it for that either. They're in it for what you said. They're in it for the platform. They're in it for the idea of I can get my ideas broadcast as wide as possible for pennies. Doesn't matter. It's about likes. It's about social media credit. That's what it's really about. That's the currency that people are going for, which is insane.
Well, we do see that rather often with the way that they use their social media accounts. They build up a large following, sometimes into the tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of followers, based upon their comic work, and then proceed to use the platform that they built to proselytize on whatever social issue it is.
Sure.
They should be trying to sell their comic.
Yes.
They should.
I mean, there are people that do. We've seen Donnie Cates, right? He has Ryan Stegman. Those two guys work together well doing that. You got Sean Gordon Murphy does, and a few other people I can't think of right now. But yeah, if you're gonna just I don't know, it's like Gail Simone. We talked about her before. Her most popular tweets is when she's saying something silly about, comic book characters, but she's never really talking about what she's working on that often. And, I would, if you got thousands of people you got to get them, you got to get them buying your stuff. And yeah, I don't know if that other stuff is putting people off, or that's the only extra reason why people follow her. But, a little self-promotion. Well, I guess it is self-promotion. It's just not for the companies is the only problem.
And I think this goes between, I think, what's smart and what's right. I think it's smart if creators are self-promoting, they're pushing their books, they're hustling, they're working. I think there's a lot of names we've talked about in the past. I think Matt Rosenberg is an example, whether you like it or not. He hustles constantly for the books, and I think that's smart for him to do. I think that I don't think it's essential. I think that creators, at the end of the day, if push came to shove, I think you have your social media feed. It is your feed to do with as you want and take the consequences of that. If you're a smart person, I think you're promoting the books. The next step is the one that I think gets really destructive, and that's where you're not content to just put it in your social media feed. You also are trying to inject it into the actual comic you're creating as well. I may be turned off by a creator who's got a social media feed, just filled with propaganda. Either way, by the way, right or left, irritates the hell out of me when they're just constantly hammering on that. But if it's out of the book, I can at least read the book and tune out the creator. When it gets inserted into the book, and more it is, that's where the whole thing is just broken down.
Yeah. I always knew that Sienkiewicz was pretty lefty. He did all those Iran-Contra cards back in the day. And, but I never, other than that choice to do that, gig, you never really know anything about him unless you're on social media. And, it's nice because I can still read New Mutants and not care,
Sure.
Well, I think what it was it again comes back to the problem of past comics versus current comics, and older comics were about trying to convince the reader to think about, what the world, and modern comics are telling people what to think about the world. And I think that's a significant shift.
Yeah, the older stuff, they did it with a compelling story. And it was just an aspect to it, maybe a wrinkle so that you could see another side so that your characters have a little bit more depth. But when every character is basically spouting the same thing, or every comic is spouting the same thing, or at least in a different way, maybe in a different way, it's become very cumbersome.
It's a lot of creators that didn't like people coming to the conclusions that they didn't want them to.
Mm-hmm.
That's why they stopped from convincing people to think about things and telling them what to think about things. Because when you tell people
Alan
what
Moore
to think
famously did not want people to like Rorschach. He's supposed to be an unlikable character, yet he's probably one of the most relatable characters in all of the Watchmen, because he's really the only one with the code or morals that sticks with his views, and he never veers off, and he never kind of compromises his own point of view, for the story.
Right.
He shouldn't have had that awesome prison scene.
He shouldn't have had the old boy style prison scene. That's what did it. I think
awesome.
Gabriel Hernandez, I think this is a really smart comment, and it shocks me that the publishers are not pushing this more. Other industries are. You're seeing a lot of industries who are recommending this for people. It's like, have a work, especially where you have some kind of public persona, have a work account, have a personal account, and then do what you're going to do. I think it's smart for your career. I believe, and there will definitely be some people who are just really extreme on one end of the politics or the other. They're going to just hate somebody no matter what they post. But if a creator was able to say, look, this is where I'm going to promote my work, show my art, show the scripts I have, the hype upcoming projects, and this other one is where I'm just going to scream at Trump all day. I believe most fans would say, all right, well, we'll ignore that other one. I'll stick to the comics and life's okay. Most would. There are some who just won't be able to take it. But if you just made that separation, I think life would be good. I'm shocked that more companies don't promote this.
I agree with you. But we do have another super chat from Federico de la Casa, 10 euro super chat. Thank you very much. And I'll quote, I believe this is Jordan Peterson, clean your room, meaning before you criticizing others, but he's being labeled fascist by the left. And I'm a lefty. First time I see an industry with no PR where employees insult customers. He's got a point there. If you're pointing one finger at somebody else, there's three fingers pointing right back at you. If you're going to be casting the stones, you should be without sin. Or certainly if you live in a glass house, don't be doing that, because it seems like a lot of the people that were very rude to customers or even retailers, or were out there casting dispersions on people, trying to talk about their behavior or whatever. It turns out their behavior isn't so pristine either.
Well, once again, it comes back to narcissistic personality disorder.
Do these people think they'll never get caught? Are they not? I
Yes.
assume if they weren't biting their fingernails before, they all have to be biting their fingernails now. I mean, it should be like shavings on the ground like crazy.
Well, they think that. Well, honestly, my understanding of just kind of armchair psychology on this is basically they think that if they, kind of like the back in the 90s, you'd always hear about the hardcore the guy that was always firebrand about homosexuality, and then he get caught in a bus station bathroom.
Yeah.
It's the same thing. It's try to misdirect, try to be so vocal that nobody would ever possibly think that that you're guilty of that. Methinks thou doth protest too much.
Well, isn't that what that whole pledge thing's about also?
Yes.
I mean, it's like, hey, look at me. I signed this pledge. I'm a good person, right? Right? I'm a good person.
Yes. And they also think that if they make that pledge, if they vocalize it, if they're out there yelling about it and telling people, no, this is the way you have to do it, that it'll earn them some sort of good boy points that maybe whoever they had an issue with in the past won't decide to ruin them, because they'll think, well, he's changed, or he's doing the good work now, so I'll let him slide on that past indiscretion.
Well, I was delving into some of the people that use that comics pledge hashtag, and they said they signed the pledge, right? And then I was getting into some of the comments. So people aren't really happy with they're saying like Tom King signed it, and then people are it's mostly women, and hey, I can understand, but they're not. That comics pledge ain't flying with a lot of people. Then you see Scott Snyder, and then they're kind of like talking about him because of his his allegiance, I guess, with Sean Gordon Murphy or something like that. And it's like, well, we already hate this person, and even though this guy signed the pledge, I'm gonna still crap all over him. And for whatever reason, that's fine. You can do whatever you want, but it's not actually helping that thing. And coming out and saying, oh, I totally support women. And, they're saying actions are what we care about, not your words, and I agree. It's your actions. Try not acting on your actions.
Yeah, I think some basic self-control. And to the comment about Jordan Peterson, what fascinates me about Peterson is that a lot of the stuff that gets retweeted and posted, and the TED Talk style stuff that really goes out, it's common sense. Now, granted, somebody said in the chat earlier that common sense isn't common, and that's completely true. But the idea of like, hey, clean up your own room as a metaphor to make sure your house is in order before you go off and you try and interrupt everybody else's. I mean, this isn't a radical idea. This isn't like the most shocking thing. You brought up being a Gen Xer. I mean, I remember my parents telling me that when I was a kid. I think most of us probably had that experience. So now that it's coming out again as this kind of profound advice, I'm not saying anything pro or con against Peterson. I'm just saying it's weird to me that this is profound advice. It shouldn't be. The world shouldn't be this messed up.
Well, we some of us grew up not having to clean our rooms. Don't pay attention to my mess back here, by the way. And depending on the generation, I just left it messy, or we had someone pick up behind us. And these are the adults that are running the industry now.
Well, I mean, you have a world right now where everyone is trying to play the intellectual, and there are some ideas so profoundly stupid that they can only be believed by an intellectual. And that's where you're at right now. And so the normal just kind of gods of the copybook headings type thoughts are rejected because they're not profound, they're not interesting. And then whenever you do just speak common sense, everybody's like, that's crazy talk.
Yeah.
Speaking of the pledge, Perch, I know that you did a video on it, and most of what's in there is just like, be a good person.
Sure. I mean,
don't be a scumbag. But there's certainly a lot of wording in there that makes it out that the main culprit or the real issue within the industry are men.
Yeah, and that's one of those things where, okay, first off, that pledge, take out all the pronouns.
Is as hollow as anything I've ever seen in my life. Is as hollow as every other pledge that people just take, or what is the ice bucket challenge?
Sure.
Okay, cool. You put ice on your head. Congratulations.
No, it absolutely is. It's I mean, look, like I said before in the video, it is it is common sense. Take out the pronouns, all that stuff for a moment, and just look at it. It's like, yeah, don't be a scumbag. Sure. Nobody who disagrees with that. I don't know anyone who would disagree with that logically. But then they wanted to make it specific. And now, granted, of course, there are more people in the industry who are men than women. And if you wanted to go by stats, then okay. I just saw that as a waste of time, in a sense. It's like you said, it's hollow, because it's
a reason for people to dismiss it as even being relevant.
Exactly. And I think it lost its own teeth of being a statement. I mean, for the idea of just a pledge in general is kind of silly. I look at that and go, why didn't the publisher put out these guidelines? That's what's needed, not somebody saying, I'll promise not to be a jerk on social media. I mean, it's weird. But it's a shame, because I read that, my immediate reaction was, we're going to be in the same place a year from now, because none of this changes anything. And that's, and like Yul said, there are people who are making the pledge who are, a week later getting called out on both directions. Snyder's getting called out for not going after Sean Gordon Murphy. He's also getting called out for being part of the Batman team when they didn't invite a prominent woman to be part of it. So, I mean, what good is it then? It's and like somebody's just said in the chat, how about people just act like adults? Is that really so hard?
I don't know if people in comics though are, because it's kind of like Arrested Development in comicdom. It never really occurred.
Yeah, I was going to say emotionally stunted, but yeah, Arrested Development works too.
Yeah, I think instead of like that pledge, what they might have wanted to do was talk about what power positions actually are, at least in the comic book field, so that people could recognize whether or not they're in a position where they, where they're lording their power over other people, whether it's just a Warren Ellis who's a contract worker or, work for hire, and talking with somebody online, as opposed to Mark Waid, who's an editor of a company or a publisher, now, or whatever he's doing. And, what is, what is acceptable? I mean, it's not even what is acceptable. I shouldn't say that, because then we're going back to the pledge a little bit. It's just that a lot of people have said, well, I didn't realize that I was having such an effect on people's lives. And I think like maybe addressing that a little bit more and having a conversation about that kind of stuff might be a little bit better than just saying, oh, I promise not to be a bad person. It is what it is it's understanding when you're taking advantage of a situation, or at least accepting that you're taking advantage of a situation.
Yeah.
So I do want to just real quick, I want to say thank you to All About the Books for their $20 super chat. Not here to sidetrack the combo, but thanks for the great content. And thank you for supporting the channel. That's very generous of you. Now we'll get back. I think I interrupted you, Perch.
No, I'm just saying the funny part about all this is there is a job, there's a function. The job of the editor, which is a staff employee job, is intended to help curate and solve some of these problems. That's their whole point. That's one of their whole points of getting paid and taking a check, is they're supposed to be manning the clock on this stuff. And I definitely have heard from a number of creators, you can't go too hard on editors because they're underpaid and there aren't enough of them. Okay, sure, I'll sign up for that. But then again, my question is, why doesn't the publisher pay more? Why don't they hire more? And why are people not pushing on this stuff? I mean, there's just no. The people are putting. I mean, imagine you're working for a company and your boss said, "Well, I can't actually enforce anything, tell you what to do, tell you when to come in, tell you what rules you should follow. If you want to come into work with no pants on, go ahead. I can't do it one way or another. So just try and do your best. And if you would sign this pledge on social media, that'd be great." I mean, how would that work?
Well, there's a lot of, we should pay people more. They should have more an investment in the company, and maybe like things will get better as a result. But we see even in like the real world where McDonald's is balking at like, $15 an hour. We're talking about McDonald's, like they're the only company that's doing well right now, that type of stuff. And I think they can afford it. And when you see all these other companies that say, well, Big Macs are going to have to be more expensive for the consumer, I think we would see the same thing in comic books, maybe, or they'd say, well, you know what, maybe we'll just get out of publishing altogether if I have to be forced to pay people a certain amount, or, pay them more,
Yeah.
The margins of profit are so thin, it's hard to justify it. Of course, there's people in DC and Marvel that are probably getting paid way more than they should at all.
Yeah, I mean,
so I do want to say thank you to the Pepper Talk for the $5 super chat. Very generous of you. All the creators in the industry advocate for diversity first, yet there's no diversity politically. Everyone in the mainstream is liberal, and that bothers me. Well, I don't know that everyone is. I don't want, but there certainly is a far lean to the left as far as all entertainment, really, and arts. And I do think that does contribute to the echo chamber and the close-knit, self-policing kind of culture that they do have, or that we do have in the comic book industry. And I certainly believe that kind of helps or keeps the issues going forward. Doc, what do you have to say about that?
Well, yeah, I'm going to tend to agree. The problem that they have is when they're in an echo chamber like that, it's just going to push further and further to whichever direction your echo chamber is. If your echo chamber is right or left, eventually it's going to push all the all the ideas further and further to that direction. It will never push them the other way. And you'll see it in, the right. Basically, they abandoned culture a long time ago, at least the money. I mean, they truly abandoned culture long ago. And, we could get into the whole concept of, the arguments that Andrew Breitbart had, or, even people like, like Brett Smith pushes on social media about, putting money back into culture instead of the 3 millionth pointless think tank. But so with the left kind of dominating the entertainment industry, your entertainment's just going to get pushed further and further left over time. I mean, and it'll start accelerating.
Right. Yeah.
And we've been seeing that now. We see it with social media in Silicon Valley. We see it with media in general in the entertainment industry, with comics, movies, TV shows, hell, even music. Even the musicians that are out there are pushing further and further and further left. So, yeah, are we surprised at all? No. The right seat.
So I do want to say thank you very much to the Pepper Talk for the super chat. It's very generous of you. We do have another one from Federico de la Casa, a 10-euro super chat. I believe this is Jordan Peterson. Is common sense, but dismisses the sense's way left now because Orange Man bad. As Italian, we had one like him for 20 years. In comics, Peterson is hated perhaps because in his 12 Rules of Life, the art is by Ethan Van Sciver. I'm certain that does add to it. Ethan is certainly not a beloved man in the industry, or at least within the industry. I do think he certainly has his fans, but within the comic book industry, I do not believe they are big fans of Mr. Van Sciver.
As the one from the comment before, and kind of continuing with this, the one thing I'll say is that so when I was younger, especially, I didn't know who was black or white or a woman. If they had a name, I just assumed that's their name, and I didn't really think too much farther unless I knew. You go to a convention and you meet somebody, and like, oh, John Romita Jr. Now I know what he looks like. That type of stuff. Same thing with politics, except for now you could go to social media and find out. You can only assume sometimes, and right now you don't want to be conservative in comics and say anything about it. I don't think, unless you're targeting only conservatives, because they might dig that. So you don't really know who's in the industry. Like, again, I didn't know Chuck Dixon for the longest time was how he was. I knew that he was a gun guy, but I'm not. But if I'm ever going to read a comic book that has a gun in it, I'd rather read a Chuck Dixon one than any of the other people that are out there, for sure. I mean, he's the only guy I will swarm to when he's doing something like that, because, he has a really good and the thing is like, he has done diverse stories in his comic books. You just don't realize it because he's not like hammering you over the head with it. He has politics in his stories. He has something to say, but again, he does it within the voice of the character that's saying it rather than just Chuck Dixon saying it in any character. And I think that's a little bit of a difference also.
So I do want to say thank you very much to Federico De La Casa for the €10 super chat. Very generous. So Perch, I do want to talk to you about, we know there are lists out there, and the list is getting bigger and bigger, I believe, by the day with creators on there. And one of the things that I think is not helpful, and I think it does a disservice to all the allegations out there, is just putting all these people on the exact same list when the allegations are so widely varied. We have like pedophiles on that list, like convicted pedophiles on that list, and then you have people that are the allegation is that they offered a girl comic books if they came up to their room.
Yeah,
those are different.
Yes, you made me feel uncomfortable. Yeah,
you know what I mean.
I did it on purpose. I did this video where I just took 4 people and put them all together. Robbie Rodriguez and Scott Alley and Ed Piscor, because all of them were getting attention on social media at the same time. And some people pointed out to me correctly, by the way, these aren't all in the same place. And that was kind of the point of what I was doing. They're not. I think you get a guy like Scott Alley, and that story is amazing in that for, 2 decades, he basically, since the first allegations of him came up in 1999. There's a lot of people commenting on this and in the industry now who weren't born then. But for 21 years, he had this pattern, definite complaints. Now, many people can come in and say, "Oh, that's not as good or bad." Whatever. But there was some serious stuff there with Scott Alley. Yeah, Gabriel Pernez is saying it right now. But then to contrast that, and what I noticed was there's more comments in social media from comic creators on Ed Piscor, who basically went on a show and made some comments about doing a caricature that people called racist. That was nowhere close. It just not even within the bounds. You really have to be stretching. But somehow these two wind up on the same list. And I think that's what it does is it trivializes the whole thing. If you really want to solve the problems in the industry, don't put these people on the same list because it's going to give the real bad people cover. Because nobody's going to take this stuff seriously. And sexual assault is miles different from being kind of a creepy old man at a convention who's trying to hit on girls half his age, which is not cool behavior. It's creepy old man behavior. Make no mistake about it. But nobody in their right minds looks at that and says that and sexual assault are the same thing by any stretch of the imagination.
Don't kink shame, Perch.
one of them are perfectly legal behaviors and the other is not.
Right.
Well, what if we told, right after the names what exactly they got in trouble for? And instead of just making one list, make the entire list, I would can we not release this every 3 days, please? Let's just get it all out, please, so that we can either hate, judge, or love someone as a result of what happened.
Yeah,
I'm getting tired of it.
Oh, everybody is. It's bad for the industry. And again, all of this stuff always exhausts people. And so what the end result of this is the people who manage to escape it, some of which will have real serious problems in their background, will kind of continue to float around. This is what happened with Eddie back with DC. And some allegations came out, a bunch at once, and he has managed to slip under the cracks, and he continued to kind of just float around for a while. And that's not to be a broken record, but that's why it goes back to the publisher. The publisher has to start actually addressing these like a mature adult, like a mature company, and stop having it be just witch hunt by social media. That's nuts.
Yeah, that's pretty clear. Yeah. But they're not going to do that. We've got what at this point 40, 50 years worth of evidence that they have no interest in actually doing that, and they haven't done it so far. Their only real interest, the only thing that they've tried policing in the past few years is, who did you vote for?
Yeah, and that's why politics. And I know I'm guessing about 2/3 of people in the room at least right now are going to disagree about what I'm about to say. I understand we're living in a politically charged environment. I understand it's impossible to get politics out of all this stuff. But politics also starts to become a bit of a red herring. It confuses the issue. Now, I'm not saying forget it or ignore it or anything else. And I agree with what's been said before, is it does tilt left too far. And as a result, it's causing a lot of these problems. And when I say tilt left, it's more than tilt. It's a pretty steep slope at this point. But these problems we're talking about, assigning politics to them in many ways puts us in this loop that we don't get out of. I mean, many of these behaviors are just bad, whole stop. And I understand people, they can't disconnect the two, but we can treat these things separate, at least for some of these problems. I think if there's going to be a solution, we have to start treating them separately and get the politics out of it for a bit of time to really kind of focus on what's the core problem. So I know a lot of people disagree, and a lot of people say it's because of the politics this stuff's going on and all the rest. And I understand that perspective, but hiring somebody without a background check, keeping somebody employed for 19 years after they've been accused of sexual assault, not as an independent creator, but as a manager of people, that's not politics. That's stupid.
Yeah. I mean,
how about this super chat that I can't put up?
Yes, there is a super chat here, and Wes said he'd be right back.
Oh, okay. So not say it. Don't say it.
We should start talking about it. So.
All right. Federico Della Casa. You obviously wanted the slots this week. We've got a $5 euro. I love Chuck Dixon run on Green Arrow in the 90s, and the main character, Connor Hawk, was mixed, Asian, Black, Native American, and now Dixon is labeled a Nazi. Oh, are you allowed to say that word on YouTube? I'm not sure.
We won't say it more, but
okay, that's it.
It's basic. It's why the word has lost all meaning, and I think why people enjoy, they get a thrill out of saying it and calling people that as an insult, but it doesn't actually mean anything. And I think the people using it don't really have any intention of solving anything. By the way, Wes, we're talking about the super chat here from
Federico.
Yeah.
As far as Chuck Dixon, I also highly recommend his cross-gen work on Way of the Rat. Oh my God, that was so amazing. It was one of my favorite titles of any company coming out during that time. And I think, I'm not sure if he wrote this one, but there was a Richard Dragon series that Scott McDaniel drew. And that was freaking awesome also. And it had some Connor Hawk in there, if I'm not mistaken. So check that out.
Great stuff.
Yeah. Oh, you know what? And this isn't Chuck Dixon, but there was a comic book that came out around that time called Breach from DC, and it's very underrated. Bob Harris wrote that, and it had art by Polito and Marcos Martin sometimes, and that one's very good also.
Well,
That's
definitely. Thank you very much to Federico de la Casa for the €5 super chat. Thank you for supporting the channel. We have another one from Kenneth Dowling, $5. Don't know how you guys feel on the Me Too movement, but one would think with its impact, allegations like this would not be with its impact, allegations like this wouldn't be happening, as in like these things wouldn't continue on after the Me Too movement. But people are bad. Bad people are going to do bad things even with the Me Too movement. And that's kind of, it certainly shines a light on the issue. So hopefully people do speak up if they do see things that are inappropriate, going on with the industry. But, Perch, I don't think we can ever actually root these people out for good. Never let anyone back in, or everyone come in that would do something like this. It's to identify if it happens and then root the problem out. Correct?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of we have to go back into the 90s when sexual harassment was a thing. I think almost anyone who's been to any kind of big company and been employed there probably went through the sexual harassment training. If you're in a big company, they have those, and you go through them. And the goal isn't necessarily to find somebody who makes a mistake or does something they shouldn't and immediately, send them off into the raft in exile forever. The goal is to trap those situations, to make sure that you're putting in place a structure that hopefully avoids it in the first place, make sure people are educated, make sure people are retrained in some cases, and maybe you lose your job in the company. But it wasn't intended to be, the mark of shame that follows you forever. It was meant to be a way to kind of protect your employees. You're an employer. Your goal is to protect your employees. And that's what people should be doing as an employer. That's kind of your responsibility. And so it feels like to me, a lot of employers have decided they don't want to take that responsibility. They're happy to let kind of a cancel culture mob just take care of it for them. And then they can just react based on pressure. And that's how they've decided to land on it. It's easier for them. It's probably more legally sound for them, and they just kind of, ignore it. And if we're serious about really correcting these problems and having a safer industry, the employers have to take responsibility.
So I do want to say thank you very much to Kenneth Dowling for supporting the channel. It's very generous of you. We do have another comment here from Gabriel Hernandez. He's been on fire today. He said, I had an AMA, an Ask Me Anything exchange with a big name creator, and he was resistant. And I think this is one of the problems to HR rule enforcement because he's an independent contractor. Industry seems comfortable policing itself, but if you're not an employee. And I think that's one of the problems. I'm a contractor. I don't have to fall under the HR umbrella.
Yeah, and that's the gray area for them. I mean, if you're going to have an HR department, you're going to step in, you're going to start to address these things. You're taking on liability if you do it wrong. So many companies use the contractor loophole as a way to basically say, oh, we don't have any liability, so we can terminate at will, and therefore we don't get involved in it. But if you want to actually if you care about having a industry where your people feel comfortable, safe, and you're actually running a clean shop, you have to get in there and take that responsibility. You can't keep dodging it.
Okay, so we do have another super chat from Federico De La Casa, €5. Thank you so much. Woody Allen in the front. I quoted too many problematic people. The girl that tried it with him, I confused the man with the artist. I stand by that. I'm assuming that's a quote from Woody Allen.
Yeah.
So Woody Allen, it's kind of emblematic of what we're talking about here. There are the allegation is, I think when he was a younger director, like he hired Daryl Hannah as a very, very young actress and put her in a bunch of, sexually suggestive scenes. And then he cut them all out from the movie. That just seems weird. Woody Allen's just kind of an odd character. Don't you think, Perch?
Yeah. I mean, that would be a whole show in and of itself. I mean, Woody Allen has quite a track record, but I think in general, I think there's things that Hollywood went through, and I think were indicative of some Woody Allen's films where, there were clear common sense things that I think any one of us could look at and go, yeah, that's going to get somebody into trouble. That's a bad idea. But there wasn't good controls on it, and so they were allowed to happen. And over lawsuits and exposure, that's now being cleaned up quite a lot. Not completely, but quite a lot. And comics is it's their turn. And somebody said, by the way, comics aren't making a lot of money, so maybe that's why they're not addressing that. Yeah, it's true, except their parent companies are the two biggest ones are AT&T and Disney's. They already are spending money on HR, and if it really goes south, they're going to get sued like crazy. The independent contractor thing won't protect you forever.
What do you think about the fact that Marvel especially has changed hands from a bunch of there's been a bunch of different owners for Marvel.
Mm-hmm.
That was one of the reasons why Elektra came back to life, right? I think, or Jack Kirby's stuff didn't get given to him, and all that other stuff because a new company would take over, and they're like, I don't care what they said beforehand, and if that were to happen a lot, then even if you had a strict structure within your HR department, that might change as new companies take over. What do you think about that?
I think there's some truth to that. I think that that's how a lot of this stuff lingered for quite a while. But the funny thing is, I think that comics, and I might get some very fierce disagreement with this from editors and others, but I think in the 80s it was policed better than it is today. I think it's gotten worse while the two big companies have kind of coalesced. Marvel's been in theory stable under an owner for a while, and it feels like it's gotten worse under that period. But maybe it's just me.
And I do believe Federico in this one was also kind of doing the Woody Allen was saying you're confusing me with the artist. Think about my art separate from the man and my actions. Yes, I do agree with that for the most part, but sometimes when actions go so far and are so heinous, I refuse to separate the art from the artist anymore. So that's kind of my stance on that. We do have another super chat from Josh SSJ Future Go Ahead and 62093 $4.99 super chat. Thank you so much for supporting the channel, Josh. Good morning. Chuck Dixon being blacklisted really makes me mad. No one writes the Bat Family as well as he did in the late 90s, early 2000s. So the Chuck Dixon thing is kind of weird. So he has gotten somewhat recent, a recent title at at DC. I think it was Bane, something Bane. Yeah, but for the most part, you're just not going to see him, especially now that he's come out and he did a lot of stuff on Ethan Van Sciver's YouTube channel and things. I don't think we'll even be seeing him at DC Comics. Maybe, for a milestone issue or some type of celebration.
Did he do anything on that Robin? Because that would have been the one to do, right? Or something.
I don't think he had a story in that, no. And DC's quick to point out, by the way, that he's definitely not blacklisted. And they point to that Bane comic, and they say he's definitely not blacklisted. But at the same time, and I think this is connected, the way people are hired is, an editor will pick somebody that they want to kind of run this book, or they solicit a pitch. And because they're in control of that method, it's not blacklisting, but it's all but. It's blacklisting and everything but name. There's not an official blacklist, but there's a network of people that they tap. And so it's kind of by nature of association, it can weed people out. And I think if you're, unfortunately, you don't have somebody at the top looking at all the titles and going, okay, let's do what's necessarily best for the business, or where we think we can get the most audience, to kind of, outsource that responsibility to the editors. And in many cases, these editors are, in their early 20s and have no real concept and being paid nothing. So, I mean, that's just a system begging for problems.
Yeah.
All right, so thank you, Josh. We have another super chat from Josh 999. He says, when I first got into grad school, I had a peer tell me they loved Dixon's Birds of Prey run, but once they found out he was a Republican, they couldn't read his work anymore. And that was sad. I think that is sad. If you find out somebody's political views and that just puts them on your do not read list, just for that, I think you should probably get your priorities straight.
It's one of the reasons why the issue that you see with, conservatives tend to think that liberals or leftists are wrong, whereas leftists think that conservatives are evil.
Wait a second.
No. It oftentimes comes back to that. And because, if conservatives had the same standard as this person of you couldn't read anything by a Democrat, they wouldn't be reading comics.
Sure.
I mean,
a lot of people have stopped reading comic books. So,
but that's because they've stopped being. Instead of having liberal talking points, they're just liberal propaganda.
Right. Yeah.
There's a difference.
Oh, he was right. I don't have it here. I could swear he missed it, but I'll take your word for it, Stan Hooper. I feel stupid now. I should have had that on the top of my mind.
Yeah, I haven't read the Catwoman special, but I was like, I thought he was in the Robin special. But so there you go. And I do want to say thank you very much to Josh. I think that's a weird stance to take, but I do want to kind of transition over to one of the real underlying issues with comic book culture, and I think has really contributed to a lot with the allegations that we're seeing coming out right now. And it is the comic book convention scene and how important it is to comic books in general. So basically, the comic book industry, there's no clear route in if you're a new creator to get in front and pitch an idea to DC Comics or be discovered. Like there's no pipeline, for bringing in new talent and cultivating and stuff like that, other than the convention scene. So you have all these prospective creators, and you have an industry that the good old boy network is kind of prevalent, nepotism, cronyism. So they're basically incentivizing new creators to go into the conventions where all the other creators that have power in there, because they're being paid to be there and they're selling their wares and whatnot, because there's not quite enough pay in the industry probably for a lot of them just to make ends meet. So they need to be there as well. You're bringing them together, and they certainly have an amount of power as far as I can get you an introduction. Oh, maybe I'm on the Spider-Man line right now. There's an opening right now. I would like one of my friends to be on that team, kind of thing, to where you have these people with disproportionate positions in the industry and making them, come into contact and develop personal relationships. And it's just a breeding ground for unprofessional behavior for people taking advantage of their position.
Yeah, cons have so many problems to them, but what you're talking about here is a huge one, because we're hearing with Alan Moore and others, Jason Latour, this idea of grooming, and you're seeing people outraged about it, mad about it, but at the same time, and this is where I find it strange, but I find myself really agreeing with some things that Kelly Sue DeConnick said, that you set up a system where it's all based on network. Like I said, it's based on who you know. There's no oversight to that. Editors can kind of make choices with very little control. In fact, we've heard stories from Marvel where people were making choices on creative people for the comics with just by themselves. An assistant editor was making a choice with no oversight at all. And so you set up that situation. What do you think is going to happen at conventions? If it's completely based on networking and buddying up and currying favor with someone, then that is absolutely going to create a world where harassment's going to take place, where somebody's going to abuse their power, where they're going to trade sex for a job. You've created a structure. I mean, it's laughable for me to see all these people talking about grooming is bad, but then let's leave the structure in place. Or in some cases say, next time, go out and hire, a woman for this project. Doesn't matter. If somebody wrote a tweet, doesn't matter if she's talented, just hire a woman for this project. It's like, that's the same problem. That's just going to continue.
Yes, the solution was always the same that a lot of CGers had, which is, it's weird. They finally come around to, hey, just hire on blind merit. But hey, that solves all their fucking problems.
Funny enough, you might find this one interesting, Doc. That's kind of how Tom Taylor found his way into the industry. They had a talent contest.
Right.
He went in and he supplied his submission. It won out, and he got a trial run on. I believe he got to write a special story in an anthology, and that was how he got in the industry. That seems like a healthy way to get in, because it's essentially like Gabriel Hernandez is talking about right here, a blind talent test. Show this is what we want the story to be. Where's your submission? Who has the best story? Who's obviously got some talent for it, is a little bit ahead of the curve, probably has written some comic books, and that is a good way to get a foot in the industry. But I don't feel like there's probably enough of that out there.
They should have more submissions, period. I mean, it shouldn't even be a talent contest. Just say, hey, I'm a company that puts out comics, send your submissions in. And, like the old days, especially for a writer, because there's no other way to get them to take a look at your stuff. But an artist, at least, they can
put it online.
When they would go to, so the thing about conventions is that there wasn't email and faxing at the time, or at least a lot. And
true,
getting to conventions, especially San Diego, that was the big one. But I think one of the reasons why everybody said, well, this is the time I actually get to meet these people that I'm talking to, that type of stuff. And I think that's where, way back in the day is when all the, it was pretty freaky back then. There was a lot of swingers and stuff. And I think that was one of the reasons why they like going to the convention so much. Oh, in San Diego, we can all take our, go down to the beach and do whatever we're going to do.
Get down to Black's Beach and
yeah. If anybody wants to know more, read Real Cerebus comic books.
Well, I think a lot of this system of it being just, now it was always there. I mean, going back to, how Stan even got his job, because his uncle was the publisher.
Yeah.
So a lot of this has been going on in the industry for forever. But the difference was, back in the day, you stuck around because you sold. You got your foot in the door because of who you knew, but you stuck around by selling. And the sales kind of target has been removed. You don't have to do that anymore. You just have to, now it's only the three things that that Gaiman talks about, which is, be pleasant, be cheap, or be quick.
Yeah.
That's the only thing that matters. And that shouldn't matter. I mean, that's fine if you just want to be a journeyman, but to keep getting top tier gigs, a lot of this comes back to kind of an amplification of that, of the 60s nepotism that happened under the Image Revolution, where it was 7 guys that left Marvel. And let's not kid ourselves. If Image would have failed, none of those people would be in comics today. The entire industry tried the exact same shit, the same shady, underhanded crap with trying to knock out every publishing option that they had, try to block them from printers. They got lucky that Malibu needed money. And that was the only way that they were able to actually get started. But the thing is, no writers would come over and work with them because they didn't want to risk losing their gigs at, Marvel and DC. They were basically said, if you leave and go with them, you're never working here again. Early on in the in the formation of Image. So the only thing they had to do, the only thing they were able to do was call their buddies. The kids that they grew up with, their neighbors, their brothers and sisters, and then hire people that have never worked in comics either to come in and, be an intern or learn how to do this. So it got really, kind of put on steroids during the Image Revolution. And then in the 2000s, with the advent of things like the Warren Ellis forums, that was the new way in.
Yeah, there were some comments. That's true, and I think that the importance why I hammer on history, and I sometimes take it from kind of both groups at various times for focusing on that, is a lot of stuff has happened before, and there's a lot of material we can learn from to figure out, to predict where things are going. I think there were some comments made about 10 years ago at a con where, and I want to say this was Warren Ellis, but it might not have been. It was in that realm with somebody at Marvel at the time. Who were doing some work saying, personality fit is more important than talent in a lot of cases, because it's a small industry and we have to get along and we have to produce work. And when you're producing in such a situation, the personality fit, how well you get along, how well you can kind of buddy up to people is going to be more important than the talent. And I remember thinking at the time, what a profoundly dangerous statement that is, because it's encouraging people to spend most of their time on, making sure that they're liked by the right people. And unfortunately, for all this stuff about grooming, one way you can have yourself liked by the right people is by sleeping with them. And so, I mean, look, I'm not trying to say it is a prude here. It's just like none of this should be terribly surprising that it worked out the way it is. And I think if anyone thinks that a Twitter pledge or any of this other stuff is going to solve the problems of the convention, it's not. We're going to be here again in 5 years, in 10 years. As a fan of comics, I don't want to be talking about this next year or next week. Well, it's going to be.
Well, the other point was the one that I made on Twitter the other day where, and I think I might have made this last week too, you have a bunch of socially awkward nerds that work in isolated, working environments and don't really talk to other people, barely leave their house. And then they go to a convention and start talking about, and then try to hook up with somebody. Yes, it's going to be fucking awkward. Socially awkward nerd trying to hit on socially awkward nerd. Don't expect flawless and perfect flirting.
And that nerd starts as a fan, becomes a creator, maybe as an editor, maybe you publish your own comics eventually. There isn't anybody in the Image offices that isn't a dork. You know what I mean? Doesn't matter. They're cool. They're a hit company. Yeah, they aren't.
Yep.
So we do have a $5 super chat from Club Cosplay, the Nerds Nightclub. Conventions are the new music festival for nerds, and the party is real, and everything that comes along with that. That certainly appears to be the case. I know, Perch, you've talked about on your channel a lot, and I've heard stories about some stuff that's happening. It's just so heinous, I could not speak about it right here because, it would get my channel flagged just by talking kind of around the details about some of the weird shit that goes on. Obviously, we've had a lot of allegations. Of course, we just had one of a woman attacking another woman during I think it was Emerald City Comic Con.
Yeah, I mean, the Seattle Comic Con has a lot of stories from the convention owners all the way through. That seems to be the epicenter for most of bad behavior. Most of the stuff I've seen firsthand has been in the San Diego Comic Con. People go up to Old Town in San Diego and lose their minds on a consistent basis. But I mean, look, in tech, when they started doing the tech conferences, like CES and some of these others, I remember Microsoft at the time making statements about how we've got all these socially awkward nerds, these techie geek guys, and we need to make sure that we're putting some structure around them because they don't know how to handle these situations. They're going to get in a big convention where they're exposed to a lot of different things, and the odds of sex and drug use are going to go off the chart. So, I remember as a manager and as my manager telling me at the time, hey, watch out for your people because people are exposed to things for the first time. They're going to do things they will regret. So you got to put some extra mentorship and protection there. And it feels like comics is very much the same case, but everybody washes their hands on that mentorship part.
And also, just because a person's older doesn't mean they're wise, or like you said, this might be the first time they actually left their state, or the country or whatever. And if they're a dork and they don't have social skills and they get put in these situations, all hell could break loose.
Yep.
There's always a good solution that, I don't know, would talking about hookers get you demonetized, Wes?
I'm not talking about hookers, Doc. Hookers aren't the solution.
Ladies of the evening.
No, that's not the solution. That's asinine.
They're there though.
But we do have another $10 super chat from Kenneth Dowling. Thank you so much for supporting the channel, and thank you to Club Cosplay. Talent is key. Diversity is important, but it must be rooted in talent. I like that Brian Hill is a great writer who is black rather than a black writer, and I'm a black guy saying this. I think that's a really important distinction, that you should be hiring the talent based, or the creators based on the talent, rather than surface traits or who you know. I think that is absolutely at the root of a lot of what's wrong with the comic book culture right now.
Do you remember when Bleeding Cool was doing those breakdowns of how many like women or minorities actually work at companies and stuff like that? And it was like always like the highest percentage of women was always like editors and stuff like that, or colorists. And they're like, oh, Marvel didn't have women on covers this month, so they're down the percentage points and stuff like that. I mean, that was probably like when I first started opening my store. I think they were doing that in like 2011, 2012 or something like that. And it was a real, no, within the publishers. Like it was a real concern, or one of the things that they always harped on in the beginning when I opened up. And it was like,
yeah, it was this one guy who was obsessed with it. He wrote guest columns, and he would kind of come in every week, I think, or maybe it was every month, and he would have this stat breakdown, like you said, and it was always
there'd be a pie chart.
Yeah,
that's why I'm doing that.
You're like, oh my God, somebody's spending way too much time in Excel tracking all this. Why in the world did you pick this to do this with your life? But it was very much, yeah, I remember this, and I think it was like you said, it was sending the wrong message all over the place of what to do.
I mean, it's like I said. Sorry, Doc.
No, I was just saying it was just about quotas, not about.
Yeah, exactly. It became that. And it's like I said, I didn't know back in the day, and maybe that's just because I can't read words properly, who was a man, who was a woman, who was black, white, whatever, and it never dawned on me until you actually see these people. But now, social media, he, her, them, black, whatever, and it's all on your tag, on your profile.
Well, the publishing industry, just the general book publishing industry, has seen the same thing. Women tend to flock to fields differently than men. I mean, this is something that's, I don't know why. I'm just looking at the breakdown, and if you look at most of the major like publishing houses, almost their entire editorial staff is female, and almost all of them. And nobody makes a big deal about that.
I do want to say thank you very much to Kenneth Dowling for the $10 super chat. Very generous of you. We do have another one from Club Cosplay talking about the Comic Con scene. $5. Thank you so much. We pulled 3,000 nerds for WonderCon 2018 after party, and I can tell you when the booze go in, the brains go out. I imagine that. I've only personally been to one comic convention myself, but I imagine you get a bunch of people that haven't partied a whole lot in their life. They finally all get together, and you throw the booze in there, and it's it's Animal House, right?
It's called Liquid Courage for a reason, right?
Right. And there's a factor here that I think a lot of people miss, in that these comic creators, by and large, they're sitting in their house. They don't go to an office. They're freelancers. They have a very introverted life. That's what they do. Their relationships are built around the barista they know at Starbucks, and then maybe a comic store that they pop in at, this is the personality type, and nobody recognizes them on the street. They're just kind of mystery people. And they go to a convention, and suddenly they're put up on a stage for a panel, and you have 1,000 people kind of cheering for them and chanting and wanting autographs, and they immediately go from nobody to celebrity in an hour. And that does weird things to your head. It makes your ego goes in very strange places. It's hard to grapple with. And then by the way, convention's over, you go back to your isolated life. It's why when you go on social media and you see some of these people who are so desperate to get likes and post things that will get attention, that's why they're trying to relive that dopamine hit from the convention where, they got to step out of their invisible life for a while. But that combination, along with a lot of alcohol, does crazy things to your head.
I bet. So where's the comic book about the comic book conventions? That should be what was that Howard Chaykin one about comic? Hey kid, comics. Yeah. It should be that volume 2.
Yeah.
Name names, damn it.
You just have to wait and make sure the statute of limitations is up on some of that shit.
Oh, that yeah.
I do want to say thank you very much to Club Cosplay. We also have a $1.99 super sticker from CR Comics with Toys. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. And we do have a $5 super chat from Everett Todd. It doesn't help that the quality of cons have started to suck. Yes, they have. The comic books have certainly been downplayed. And as the movies and other parts of pop culture have kind of taken over geek culture, and I'm sure those guys do get a bit depressed when they're on the Comic-Con scene and they're put back in the corner.
Well, I'm a big fan of the very small conventions.
Yeah, me too.
The ones that are, still in like a ballroom rather than in a convention center, or in a, whatever, like whatever, like the Boy Scout, wherever the Boy Scouts meet.
Yeah, exactly. Well, we had one in Berkeley. It would come out like every 3 or 4 months, and it was like at a retirement home. And then they got so big they had to go to the community college, the adult education center. So that's the kind of place you're talking about too. And I love it, man. And this is not anything against cosplay. I might have an opinion about cosplay, but it's not that. There is no cosplay there. There's no, there's like one artist or creator that's there. And it's like all centered around that one person. And it's also very low key.
Yeah.
I love it. I mean, that's where you get your good stuff,
Yeah. The kinds that have basically any time that conventions have started focusing on the B, C, and Z list celebrities, to the they always do it at the detriment of the actual creators.
Well, when I was a kid, it was all the lame Hollywood people were always like Star Trek women that kissed Kirk or something like that.
Yeah.
And that was awesome because, where else are you going to see these people? But
at San Antonio Comic-Con, like the big guest they had was like the British female doctor in ER. I was like, people know who her name is? She's like the British doctor in ER. Like, people want her autograph? I was like, baffling. Like,
but yeah, you end up, so a lot of the small shows we'll end up bringing in maybe 8 or sometimes as little as one creator, but sometimes as many as 8 or 10 or 15, and they might bring in a couple of small press. Top Cow tends to come to Pittsburgh for some of the small shows every so often. think they've been at like the last 3 that I've gone to. But so you'll have like Matt Hawkins there. You'll have, some of the locals. Ed Piskor will be there sometimes. Scott McDaniel will be there a lot of times. And then they'll bring in a handful from out of town, but they don't focus on the Z-list celebs like the TV people. Mm-hmm. And as a result, you end up with a lot more comic vendors that show up, a lot fewer random, Funko Pop stalls, and there's a lot more money in the room for comics, which I always love.
I agree. There's not enough comics at comic book conventions anymore. So I do want to say thank you very much to Federico De La Casa for the €5 super chat. I love Priest because he has a unique style and relaunched the Black Panther. We now know about it. He's not praised like he should be. And for years, he thought Dale Keown was a woman.
Well, he had the hair for it.
That's true.
Dude, I want to get in on this really quick. I'm reading Priest's Steel series that he did after Louise Simonson left. And it was like around 38, 37 when he started. And it's drawn by Dennis Cohen. And it is one of my favorite things I missed out on in the 90s. And I think it's really, really good. So if you got to track those down. I love Priest.
So thank you very much to Federico De La Casa. But we do have a comment that I want to talk about here. And this is from Pedro. I'm going to butcher your name. I'm sorry. Casedo. He says, stereotyping the comic book creators is not the way either. A douche is a douche. I'm a storyboard artist and a musician. Not really an introvert. I see douchier behavior on both spheres.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah. We're lumping people in, obviously. Like that list.
Yeah, definitely there's some broad brush strokes being done here. And it's right. I think it can happen other places and it does happen everywhere. I think it goes.
You can be an introvert and be the sweetest man in the world. You can be an extrovert, be the sweetest person in the world. You can be an introvert and be an absolute douchebag. You can be an extrovert. You can be an absolute douchebag. We should all be, judged on the merits of our actions and behavior.
Sure. Yeah. Ted Bundy was like, all the ladies liked him, right? And I mean,
until they didn't.
Until they didn't. Yeah. I mean, I'm just being serious. Everybody talked about his charisma and how he was able to convince people that he wasn't guilty or whatever, and he's not a good guy.
No, it's true. I think I think it's a psychology of the thing. It's maybe not as much extrovert, introvert. I use those words, so I'll backtrack from that a little bit. But I think it's this nature of the human person, whatever their personality type, they're just not really equipped to go from isolation life to celebrity life to party back to isolation. It's a roller coaster, and I think it warps everybody's head.
Everybody gets a dopamine hit when all of a sudden you feel important.
Right. And that's tricky to deal with. It's hard to deal with. And when you have the publishers and the managers washing their hands of that situation going, I don't have to pay any attention to this. I mean, a lot of these people are seeing it for the first time. And you'd hope that there is some guidance and some help. If the comic industry wants to solve this, help your people out. Don't throw them into the deep end and just hope that they swim or sink.
The most the thing that aggravates me the most is, we knew about this before, I heard about this about him.
Yeah, talking about it for years.
Yeah. Eric Escavels.
Exactly. Yeah. Or I mean, we always knew about this person. What? Why are you coming out now and talking about it then?
and that is the most aggravating, completely irresponsible part of this whole thing. It's the comments of for 10 years or more, we've been talking about this. It's like, sorry,
do something.
Remember that Comics Journal article?
Yeah. Exactly. It does not, you don't get any credit for saying you've known about it for 10 years. In fact, I mean, any sensible person will look at that and go, well, you're part of the problem then.
Yes.
Yeah.
And in many cases,
because the person that has the allegation doesn't feel comfortable coming forward with the information doesn't mean that you can't. You don't have to out them, but you can say that this person is doing this. You don't have to talk about who they specifically did it to. In the likelihood, if someone is doing that to one person, they're doing it to multiple people, and they won't know who you were talking about anyway.
What would a teacher, if they knew about anything like this going on in their classroom? Okay. What would a teacher get if that got caught? If this got found out, and then you found out that the teacher knew about it, they'd be canned, right? I mean,
exactly. That's exactly it. And I 100% agree. And I know that sometimes it takes a lot of courage to build up to something that happened to you, and no doubt. And sometimes it takes years for you to come up to that. Agreed. I'm not saying that that at all.
Yeah, not talking about them.
I'm not talking about that. No, but when you casually throw out this stuff of like, oh yeah, 10 years ago he hit on me and it was gross. It's like, are you not? You didn't say anything to anyone. You didn't talk to the company. And yeah, and when it's a manager, when it's somebody there's a couple editors who chimed in on these threads going, oh yeah, I always knew about this. Then why did you hire them? That you were the one who was going to hire them. Why did you keep employing them?
Yeah.
With some of the dark horse stuff, there were people who were in a manager position saying, oh yeah, this has been a story for a while. It's like, and you kept them employed. Why? It was your choice.
Yeah, I mean, Nola's getting a lot of.
With Yule's comment, I would replace the word teacher for professor, because I think when we're talking about children and we're talking about adults, it's two different kind of sets of allegations in my mind. But if you were a professor and you knew someone was doing this to your student that was 19 or 20, would you move in to try and protect them?
Yeah. I mean, well, depends if I'm tenured or not, I guess.
And there's a problem.
It's the same problem. Like, do I have a secure job? Can I come out and say something? Am I going to get blacklisted for being a rabble rouser?
Breaking the
don't rock the boat.
The code of silence in the industry.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean,
that's the problem right there.
Mm-hmm.
They got to get over themselves one way or the other. I mean, it's either something you're okay with, as we see more and more people that have that are different than the old boys network, I guess we could call it, as they come in and they're like, I don't like this. They're either going to leave, never come back, or come out and say something, and that's what we're seeing a lot more.
I do want to kind of hit this up, and then I am going to get to another super chat where we're going to talk about a little bit about comics here at the end, but. If the industry is really interested in tackling these issues and changing the culture, a pledge is not going to do it. Or just every year or so, all these allegations coming out on social media, the mob showing up, condemning people, kind of booting them out of the industry, waiting to come back the next year, for the next group of creators that they decide to out at that time. They need to do something. Perch, I would say, there needs to be some type of. If you're going to conventions, the convention should probably have a code of conduct. When you're a guest at this convention, if we're paying you, we want you to act this way. And the publishers need to come up with strong policy, but I think they need to get together, discuss what they know between themselves, and come up with something that's uniform throughout the industry that they can apply equally.
Yeah, I think so. And I think there's an easy way to start. Particularly for Marvel and DC, AT&T and Disney have very well-established code of conduct policies within their company. They're printed there. They're part of the employee handbook. You can't legally kind of transfer all those to an independent contractor, but you can most. And you can certainly set a standard set of conduct for what you expect people who are representing you to live by. And I think you can also train and perhaps send more editorial support and more, support staff in general to these things to just make sure stuff stays in line and it doesn't go nuts. It doesn't have to be draconian. It just needs to be a structure. And I think so much would be helped with a lot of creators by, when they're going to their first con, buddy up with somebody. Something that was not in that pledge, but should have been, is if I'm an established creator, I'm going to work with a newer creator to just help show them the ropes.
Probably should have an introductory course. If this is your first time at the convention, here's the ground rules. This is what you're going to see. If you're a veteran, here's a 30-minute reminder.
Exactly. And if you can set some things about that, it will take away some of the gray areas. Some people are saying in the chat, sometimes it's flirting, sometimes it's people hooking up. You're not trying to ban all of that. But as long as you have a structure where, somebody who's representing your company is able to go to a convention, get just absolutely plastered, and then go out and just start screaming and destroying things, that's a problem. And it's a problem that the publishers and the managers, the owners have to take responsibility for. Most other industries have done that. Comics continues to do this. Well, they're not really an employee, so I don't need to get involved. That's it. Again, What's funny is I think the big publishers believe that legally they're protecting themselves by keeping an arm's distance. And as you've seen in other industries, they are not. This can absolutely and has successfully been prosecuted back at the publishers, and it's only a matter of time before it does.
I do agree. So there's some other things that I was thinking about. So when we talk about policy, like one of the things we know that all of these publishers do have, and this is maybe a reason why people wouldn't take it seriously, Perch, is we do know that they do have like a social media policy that is being flaunted by creators. They do not abide by them, and the publishers themselves do not enforce the policy. So if they're going to create a policy, it has to have teeth, and they have to actually enforce it to the letter of the law. And that seems to be an issue that we know is in the industry right now.
It is. I think you make these policies, and right now they're making these policies to satisfy legal HR requirements within their companies, not actually live by them or enforce them or use them. They're used as kind of backup, that if somebody is irritating you or somebody is doing something that you don't like, offended somebody, and you need some,
create a paper trail.
You can have a paper trail. That's what it's for. It's basically grounds to protect yourself. That is, to some extent, from what I understand, some of what happened with Van Sciver and some of the others is that there was a paper trail that got pulled out, wasn't being enforced. And not going to that guy in particular, but any creator who's going off record. You've seen, the stuff with Max Bemis and Robbie Rodriguez and other stuff clearly violating the social media policies that are established at Marvel and DC by the letter. All it takes is literally an editor picking that thing up, calling them up and saying, "Hey guys, no, look at this page. You are in violation. As you're doing this wrong. You gotta stop it." But like you said, the publishers are basically going, "Well, I'm too busy. I'm not interested. I'm not involved. I'll save this." From what I've understood from Rodriguez, they took note of that event. They put it in a file. They didn't do anything about it, and it became something that could be pulled out later if there was a problem. And that's just for a company. Again, these companies talk about their superhero companies, that they know what justice is. There's even in that pledge there is talk about we're in the superhero industry. We should be like superheroes. That's where it starts.
Honestly, it just seems like it's their way of axing somebody's guaranteed contract so that they don't have to keep so if somebody eventually just stops selling, they can lock them down for cheap, and then whenever they stop selling or they never really start selling, they don't have to keep giving them the X number of pages that their contract promised them.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about that because I never heard that allegation. But let's move on. We do have a super chat from Federico de la Casa for €2. I have all the Steel issues. Best Black DC hero. Do you agree with that one, Yule Carter?
Yeah, I like Steel quite a bit. When he was in Man of Steel and Mark Schultz was writing it, it was fantastic. I like his niece. Yeah, I dig Steel. Probably my favorite Black superhero. Sure.
Really? DC Comics more than Black Lightning?
Yeah, I'm not a Black Lightning fan, actually. I never have been.
I
like Cyborg a lot.
John Stewart's my
John
guy.
Stewart's cool. Yeah, but he destroyed an entire planet, so I can't get behind him.
He did what he had to do. The situation called for an action.
John Stewart's great. I think John Stewart and Jim Rhodes over in the Marvel world, why they don't do more with those characters, it's always weird to me. It's always like they take a couple steps and they retreat from it.
Yeah. Oh, what about if I was Martian Manhunter? When he adopts a human form, he's a black man, right? There you go. He at least identifies.
Thank you very much for supporting the channel, Federico de la Casa. You're very generous today. We do have one final super chat from Walesy, I believe it is. $4.99. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. Fun show. Is this Me Too problem more prevalent at smaller publishers without HR departments? I'll let you handle that one real quick, Perch, and then we'll have one last thing to talk about.
Yeah, you know what? It's funny. I'm going to give a gut answer here, but I don't think so. I actually think the smaller publishers tend to keep it wrapped up a little tighter. I may be wildly wrong about that. So that's a good question. I'm going to have to go out and research, but I think that the problems as they kind of roll out happen more at the bigger publishers. And I think part of why is some of the Me Too problems are very much based on that kind of influence. It's this very nebulous how you get a job, and people want a job with the big boys. And so, not big companies, sorry, not big boys. You have to watch all the pronouns here. The big companies. And so they're less likely to do maybe things that are wrong at the smaller publishers. It's very much a gut answer based on what I've seen. So I may be wrong, but my impression is it's actually more prevalent with the bigger publishers than the smaller ones.
I'd say there's probably not as many people falling all over themselves to get in with the little publishers willing to put themselves in awkward situations.
And there's less money in there as well. So yeah.
So I do want to say thank you to everybody on the panel and definitely everybody in the chat. So it was a very live chat, a lot of great points. This is a lot of difficult things to talk about, but I think it was important. Okay, we do have one final super chat. I just came in, and this is from Deadshot Dookie 999. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. Another great show, guys, and another great show by you all in the comments. Those are all great. And we got one last thing that I probably should have led with, and I do regret that. But thank you very much once again, Deadshot Dookie. Very generous of you. Anthony Pacino says, "Rest in peace, Joe Sano."
Yeah.
Gold standard for a person, comic pro, artist, and inker. First inker I ever truly noticed. Could see how much better he was than others. Yule, what do you have to say about that?
You had to go to me first. He got his job done for sure, and I think I should leave it at that.
All right, Perch, what do you have to say about that?
No, I think he's definitely an incredible pro, and has he's got a legacy, I think, in the industry. He's done a lot. I think it's I'm sad to see a lot of these old names pass away, because I think there's some real just mountain of work that's incredible. And what saddens me a little bit is that there's less and less. It's hard to find them anymore. They pass away and then they vanish, and that's the sad part. Is I think there's an amazing amount of great work out there that just kind of quietly vanishes. And so yeah.
Can I jump on that really quick? Because like when we see a recolored comic, unless they forget to edit the person's name out for some reason, you don't know who the original colorist is anymore. Yeah. And that's super sad. And I'll leave it at that.
All right, Doc, I'm going to give you the final word on Joe Sano.
I think that he's another one of those guys that, Perch kind of hinted at this, not only their work that's left, but the amount of tribal knowledge that as an inker that is lost from the industry. I mean, inking's kind of a lost profession. It's a lost art in comics these days. And the amount of tribal knowledge that he's a guy that should have been spending his last years just teaching all of these young artists how to create. They would have been doing so much great things for the industry.
That's so true. I think as we've talked today a little bit about mentorship and kind of the younger generation of people coming in, learning from the older generation, there's a lot of people here that we're losing and either passing away or just exiting the industry, who would majorly help the topic we've talked about for the last 2 hours, that would actually teach people a lot of things. Now, some of these older guys had plenty of their wild parties, which is a show for another time. But still, there is amazing information and value there that's just disappearing.
I agree. So I think this is a great panel. I hope everyone enjoyed it. Thank you so much for contributing as far as the panel and everybody in the chats. Yule, did you need to say anything before we wrap this up, buddy? Glad you could make it.
Thank you, everybody.
A solid X-Men shirt there, buddy.
Thank you very much. It's
oh yeah, that's good.
I love John Byrne.
We need to focus on Yule's X-Men shirt on the way out.
Yeah, we can do that. I'll stand up. I guess that's what I'm going to end with. I love John Byrne's work. Buy it.
Even though he's also...
All right.
Oh, yeah.
Not the most loved guy. So, Perch, do you have anything that you wanted to say last before we head out?
No, just I really appreciate the comments in the chat and people trying to think about this in a more complex way. It's easy to take knee-jerk reactions. It's not as simple as just boiling down to right or left or this or that. This is a complex problem, and I hope the industry takes notice and really tries to solve it.
Mm-hmm. And last but not least, Doc, thank you so much for showing up late. Obviously, it was last minute. Aaron Sparrow was actually supposed to be on the channel, a comic book freelance editor and writer, but he thought we were doing this at night. I hadn't had him on the channel for an aficionados for quite a while, and we weren't quite synced up. So thank you for coming in last minute. I think you did a wonderful job contributing to the thing, to the discussion. Obviously, you weren't fully prepared like everybody else, but no one noticed because you're a pro, dude. You're a pro.
Yeah. Oh, I appreciate the last minute invite, and I appreciate anything that I was able to contribute to this. Thanks everybody in the chat. You guys were awesome today. The chat was definitely just ripping today.
Yeah,
absolutely. All right, let's see it. We're going to go out on this. You get the solo layout.
Nice.
All right, Salamopo, everybody, and make sure you're reading your X-Men because that is a beautiful shirt.
Wash your ass.
Wash your ass.